This is the time set in the matter for the preliminary hearing status conference. So I am going to inquire of counsel. Ms. Taylor, what's the status at this time?
Thank you, Your Honor. We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June. We would request the 3rd or 4th week of June and probably 4 or 5 days for preliminary hearing. Mr. Kohberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case and be prepared.
So, Mr. Kohberger, I need to speak to you for a moment then. Sir, you do understand, and Ms. Taylor has represented here, that she's advised you of your right to have, or fully discussed with you, the right that you have, which is to have your preliminary hearing within 14 days of the date that you initially appeared before this court. As you recall, when I advised you of your rights, that hearing is a probable cause hearing where the state has to establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. If you waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing, it does not mean that you're giving up your right to have a preliminary hearing. It simply means that you would not be able to come back and challenge that the state did not present probable cause within 14 days. Do you understand?
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us here on the Sunday News at 10. I'm Shira Matsuzawa. Doug Petcash has the night off. And both legal sides are busy preparing for Bryan Kohberger's 5-day preliminary hearing in late June. The 28-year-old is charged with murdering 4 University of Idaho students, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez. Newly released court documents from the Latah County Prosecutor's Office detail the state's response to a discovery request filed by Kohberger's attorney earlier this month. And this means the prosecution is sharing its evidence with the legal defense team representing Kohberger. And News Channel 7's Abby Davis joins us now to break everything down. And Abby, you know, discovery requests are pretty standard in pretrial processes like this.
Well, not only that, Shira, this is likely only the first round of discovery requests, with both sides really just making sure that they have access to the same exact evidence. On January 10th, Bryan Kohberger's public defender filed a request for discovery in court. According to the American Bar Association, this is the formal process of exchanging information between the prosecution and the defense about witnesses and evidence they'll represent at trial. In that request, they asked for 18 things, including a list of potential witnesses, police reports, and evidence. State law requires the prosecution to respond. On January 23rd, the Latah County Prosecutor's Office confirmed it fulfilled that request. New court documents show the state sent the defense police reports and documents, including 995 pages, 1 audio-video file, and a number of photos. Former Idaho Attorney General Dave Leroy told KTVB this exchange of evidence is fairly standard. He says what makes this response unique is the large amount of evidence to sort through, considering the pretrial process only recently begun. Discovery requests ensure both sides have access to the same evidence attorneys will use to craft their arguments either for or against Kohberger. The discovery process is ongoing. Latah County's prosecuting attorney confirmed they'll give the defense any new information discovered in the upcoming months. As for what's next, Leroy expects the state to request a discovery back from the defense. He says the state will most likely ask for similar material and information the defense may use in the courtroom. Kohberger waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing earlier this month. He'll be back in court, like we said earlier, for his preliminary hearing on June 26th. Leroy says a judge will then decide if there's probable cause to believe a crime was committed and if there is probable cause to believe Kohberger committed the crime. If there is, Shira, a different judge from the district court would then set a date for trial if Kohberger requests one.
All right. Abby Davis, thank you for breaking that down for us.
Right now, the case against the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students is heating up. Bryan Kohberger's defense team now questioning whether the evidence against him is admissible in court.
All right, so Fox 13's Maria Garcia joining us now with more on the questions his attorneys are raising at this point. Hi, Maria.
Good morning. Bryan Kohberger was back in court yesterday for a hearing that lasted about 30 minutes, and his attorney asked the court to order prosecutors to turn over more evidence. Kohberger's defense wants phone records records and training records for 3 investigators and information on why the FBI expanded the range of model years of the white Hyundai Elantra that they were looking for in connection with this case. Kohberger's car initially fell outside of the range that authorities were publicly trying to track down. His defense team also wants access to records about how investigators handled the DNA in the case. The defense claiming the genetic genealogy methods used by the FBI are inadmissible. Okay, so this is where we stand now. A judge ruled the prosecution must turn over all of their evidence by July 14th. Meanwhile, work crews have started preparing the house where those murders took place for demolition. Crews will spend the next few weeks removing personal items for the family to take with them if they choose to. The victim's landlord originally donated the 6-bedroom rental to the university, which has since decided to demolish the home.
Court has adjourned as Bryan Kohberger was back in a Latah County courtroom where a judge heard arguments from his defense and the prosecution over multiple issues.
Kohberger is the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in a home just off campus in November of last year. And just yesterday, the prosecution filed their intent to seek the death penalty if a jury finds Kohberger guilty.
And that's not the only issue that got brought up today. News Channel 7's Morgan Romero was in court in Moscow this afternoon. Morgan, what can you tell us about what happened in court?
You know, guys, court today was a lot quicker than expected. If you were tuning in last night to the news at 10 and today on the news at noon, we said that we expected today's hearing to last several hours because there were 4 things that they were supposed to discuss. Motions to compel, the first motion, the second motion, and the third motion to compel, as well as motions to release the grand jury records and transcripts of those proceedings, as well as a protective order over all of those records. And then the last thing was going to be a motion to stay or pause proceedings, but they only took up one issue rather than those 4 issues on the calendar. They took up the 2 first motions to compel. On that third issue, the state said it wanted more time to respond, and today, just filed in the cases of interest database, the judge granted that order. That third motion has to do with the defense wanting information on genetic genealogy that was done that led the FBI to build a family tree leading to Kohberger. So on all those other things that were not taken up, I'm told attorneys are working together on those issues. Again, to reiterate, that's the motion to pause proceedings and the release of grand jury materials. A court spokesman says that is not necessarily unusual, and there may not be any hearings in the future about those things if they work it out behind closed doors and can resolve those. So on those motions to compel discovery, that first motion, the defense is asking for records of training related to officers who did several witness interviews. The state says that is not material to the investigation. They don't believe that they're going to call those officers to testify during trial, and they say it's out of the scope of Idaho rules to provide that information, those training records on those Idaho State Police officers and their backgrounds. But the defense says it is pertinent. These were interviews and interrogations that were done with witnesses that then led them to certain evidence and led them to, of course, their defendant, Bryan Kohberger. That second motion to compel discovery has to do with investigative reports and conclusions from all cell phone analysis done by the FBI CAST team. So the defense is asking for all records and reports related to information that was used in the probable cause affidavit that led them to arrest Bryan Kohberger and has also been used in several search warrants. Along with that ask, they're also asking for reports, communications, and documentation from the FBI forensic examiner who changed the year of the white Hyundai Elantra that law enforcement was originally looking for and changed it to the year that Bryan Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra, they say, was made. So, few things are still working out. They say the prosecution isn't hiding these things from them other than the training records. They say the stuff from the FBI, they don't believe the prosecution's hiding it from them. They think that the prosecution is waiting on it just as they are. So they're trying to compel the federal government to give them those documents. So the judge said today in an order, we are going to give the federal government by July 14th to provide these records to both the prosecution and the defense. The defense saying that all of this information is really pertinent to them providing a fair defense for their defendant, for Bryan Kohberger, as well as now that the fact that the death penalty is on the table, it makes it even more critical and relevant at this time. Again, that hearing today not lasting as long as we expected. They didn't take up all the motions that were on the court calendar, and we don't know if they will take those up in a public forum or if they'll continue to work on those behind closed doors. Back to you guys.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because of the shortness of today's proceedings, Morgan, if they had set maybe another date or something for a time to take up these other issues.
No, they've not. The only date that the judge gave today was that July 14th to compel the federal government, both the FBI CAST team and the FBI forensic examiner that looked at the Hyundai Elantra, to give the documents that the defense is asking for. And again, they don't think the prosecution is hiding those from them. They just want to really, compel the federal government to provide those and put a deadline on them, because it is bureaucracy that they're dealing with here.
Prosecutors say Bryan Kohberger must waive his right to a speedy trial if he wants to put proceedings on pause. Court documents filed last night show the prosecution is asking a judge to reconsider a 37-day pause placed on those proceedings last week, issued so the defense could review grand jury documents. Kohberger is accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students last year. And under Idaho law, a defendant's trial must begin within 6 months of their arraignment unless they waive their right to a speedy trial. Because of that, prosecutors argue it is possible Kohberger could later say he was not brought to trial in a speedy manner and the entire case could be thrown out. Kohberger's next hearing is set for August 2nd.
Lawyers for University of Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger have asked for more information on the genealogical analysis used to zero in on Kohberger as a suspect, even suggesting DNA could have been planted on the scene. The request has already postponed the trial, which had been set to start on October 2nd. In court filings Monday, the Latah County prosecutor said none of the defense's arguments hold water as reasons to share the additional information.
A deadline is now set for prosecutors to turn over evidence against the man who is accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students last year.
Graham 2 Shannon Mowdy explains the decision that came down in a Latah County court this morning. Shannon?
Now, this all revolves around a huge piece of the case, investigative genetic genealogy, which the state says was used to develop the first leads that pointed to suspect Bryan Kohberger. In what could signal a win for the defense, Latah County Judge John Judge says the state must turn over all investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG, material by December 1st.
I'm asking to look at all this because I can't make informed decisions if I don't.
The judge wants to review it all privately to determine what to turn over to Bryan Kohberger's defense team. In an October 25th order, he ruled they showed at least some of that material is essential to building a case. Citing filings from prosecutors, the judge says the FBI used a DNA profile found on a knife sheath at the scene, uploaded it to public genetic databases, and used social media, birth and death certificates, and other public info to build a family tree, which later led to Kohberger. The defense has asked for all the info on how investigators did this testing.
But I think that there's missing information from the Othram profile that we have. I'm hoping the court gets it, and I certainly understand that the court needs to see everything to make a decision. My hope is that everything includes communication so that you can follow the path of what happened.
The state has argued the FBI didn't directly compare DNA from the sheath to Kohberger's DNA, and the genetic genealogy testing won't come up at trial. Prosecutor Bill Thompson voiced concern the defense has false assumptions.
There are items that she thinks ought to be there that do not exist. But I don't think that the lawyers ought to get into this guessing game of what should and shouldn't be there, particularly since it is our position the defense has a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between SNP profiles and traditional DNA comparisons and how that process works.
We are not trying to mislead the court. We have been absolutely clear, and we've relied on Department of Justice policy in our expectations.
Thompson says he's already notified the FBI it needs to turn over everything it has.
Let's start where we know we have things, and then we can go from there.
But Thompson warned it could take a month to get the FBI documents, as a request has to go through the bureaucracy of the Department of Justice. Now, there's no timeline on how long this review may take the judge. As we heard from prosecutors before, it's a lot of material. For now, a trial date is indefinitely delayed. Shannon Mowdy, KREM 2 News.
Friday's the deadline for state prosecutors to turn over all investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG, material related to the case against Bryan Kohberger. Kohberger is the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students last November. The judge wants to review the IGG material to determine what needs to be turned over to Kohberger's defense. His team is worried about how police built a family tree and linked Kohberger to the DNA on the knife sheath officers found at the house on King Road near the University of Idaho campus. They say they need the information to get their defense ready for trial. But prosecutors say they didn't use the genetic family tree to get any warrants, and they won't be using it as evidence at the trial.
The court should ask itself, what is the state trying to hide here?
Bryan Kohberger's legal team blasting the state of Idaho, claiming prosecutors are withholding information the defense says they need to do their job, including key pieces of a video described in the charging affidavit that allegedly shows a car matching Kohberger's at the scene of the murders.
We've received little tiny pieces of that.
Kohberger's lawyers also arguing that an upcoming hearing to compel that discovery and more should be open to the public. Prosecutors insist it should be closed and vehemently deny that it's keeping materials from the defense.
The characterization that we are just consciously withholding information to frustrate the defense is utter nonsense. I can tell you many of the things that the defendant has tried to itemize, when we talk to our people, they say that doesn't exist.
Kohberger is charged with the murders of 4 University of Idaho students in their off-campus home: Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. A judge entered a not guilty plea on Kohberger's behalf. A year and a half on, a trial date has yet to be set. As tensions mount between the legal teams, the judge urged both sides to lower the temperature.
I don't want this pointing the fingers back and forth. You can argue all you want, but when it starts to be personal, it's destructive.
The family of Kaylee Gonsalves demanding justice, saying in a statement, "This banter has been going on for 17 months, and the case is turning into a hamster wheel of motions, hearings, and delayed decisions." The judge set the next hearing for May 14th to discuss the surveillance video and other discovery, and sided with the prosecution, ruling the hearing will be closed to the public.
And the families have been waiting and waiting for the judge to at least set a trial date, even if it has to move or be delayed. Is there any word on that?
Yeah, well, no trial date set just yet. We know the judge has been talking about the possibility of March of next year. And remember, he's having to balance a lot, the gravity of what is a death penalty case with the family's need for justice. They are also talking about potentially speeding things up by setting hearings for every 2 weeks.
All right, Aaron, thank you very much.
Was there anything else from AT&T that you saw or relied on to get the second one off the ground?
No, ma'am.
And in the first AT&T search warrant, are you aware that part of the request was for timing advance reports?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, that also appears in your second search warrant request, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And not only do you ask for the timing advance reports from AT&T, you ask for them from several other companies, correct? Verizon's version of it, T-Mobile's version of this kind of timing advance report. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. When was the first time you saw AT&T's timing advance report?
I do not recall when I first saw it.
Where is it?
To the best of my knowledge, all of that information from those returns has been provided to the prosecutor's office.
If I tell you I don't have a timing advance report or any from the other phone companies, where do I look for them?
I would direct you back to the prosecutor's office. Everything that Moscow PD received, in that realm, we have turned over to my knowledge.
But you know you've seen this report, is that right?
I do not recall if I've seen the timing advance reports. I'd have to see what it even looked like to know if I'd seen it.
Do you know what it is?
Not particularly. I'm no expert.
Okay. You wrote the search warrant though, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, how did you get the language for that if you don't know what this is?
So there's no secret that I rely heavily on people who are very highly educated in these topic areas to write this search warrant. So that language was likely conveyed to me through people who know much more than myself about cell phone data.
Who are those people?
Like I said, FBI agent Balance and Detective Mowry were probably my 2 main points of contact for helping me with that language.
Judge heard testimony from Detective Mowry nearly 2 weeks ago. He testified about helping with the cell phone records, and Agent Balance from the FBI, as you heard, also analyzed those records when the police received them. Brett Payne readily conceded that he's not an expert in that area, and he used information that Balance and Mowry gave him when applying for search warrants.
Is there anything else you relied on to obtain that second search warrant to compose your affidavit?
like I said earlier, we relied on cell phone records from surviving roommates as well as the victims. We relied on interviews with the 2 surviving roommates that were present at the time. We relied on the surveillance footage, cell phone data. I'd have to go paragraph by paragraph, but that's what jumps to mind.
Of those things, are you relying on other people's work to put that all together?
Yes, ma'am.
Forward, but I noticed that there wasn't any family prayer prior to the meal. Is that common?
Well, yeah, I guess.
Okay. Well, would you mind if I led us in a prayer? Just a simple one.
Of course not. Thank you. We'd be honored.
Sure. Great. All right, everybody, grab hands. Grab hands.
Kevin?
Dear Lord, we thank you for this bountiful and nourishing meal on the table before us. May it strengthen and refresh our earth bodies so that we may follow your example for yet another day. Please bless Connie, who has prepared this feast with loving hands, as well as her life partner Norman, who invites you into his heart and hopes to one day be called to Tanzania, where he can make a difference. And please bless Patty, whose kindness and hospitality has allowed me into this home where I can spread your wisdom amongst these souls. And please bless and watch over Kevin, who especially needs your guidance during his rebellious years, as he continues to lash out and alienate himself from those around him. Allow him to grow in grace and knowledge of you, and guide him in his search for his birth parents, who must one day hope to see his face, just as he longs to see theirs.
Wait, what?
In Jesus' name we pray.
Mom?
Amen.